Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by journalist and writer Abigail Tracy. You know her from places such as Inc. magazine and Vanity Fair. Today, she's coming to us from Washington, D.C. Abby, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
All
Happy to be
right.
here.
So, a couple of interesting, and I'm going to use the word interesting, things happened this week, Abby. First is um, Matt Gaetz was nominated by Donald Trump to be Attorney General of the United States. Tulsi Gabbard, former Democratic member of Congress, and big fan of all things conspiracy theory, Russian intelligence, et cetera, has been nominated to be Director of National Intelligence. So we'll get to that in a second. Second is, in an interesting turn of events, Alex Jones, the founder and host at InfoWars, had to put his business up for auction to help pay off his nearly $1 billion settlement with the parents and families of Newtown, Connecticut. And the buyer or the winner of that auction was none other than The Onion, the longstanding satirical newspaper and website. And so really interesting move by them, but I think could be a lot of fun, and we'll get to that in a second. So let's talk about Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard. Members, well, first of all, Gaetz has now resigned from the U.S. House, Abby, and this is not a coincidence. As we're recording this on Friday, the House Ethics Commission was due to release its report on all of his bad behavior and his malfeasance, as far as just being a terrible human being. So that, was helpful for him, and I assume for his quote unquote nomination. But I think it's important for the listeners and viewers to understand that someone like a Gaetz, the point is that he's unqualified. The point is that he's a ridiculous choice, and that Gabbard is a Russian agent. And they even said that on Russian television, Abby, after her announcement, is that this is a purity test for MAGA, whether or not these members of the U.S. Senate, I mean, the U.S. House, as you know, can do whatever it wants as far as talking about it, but the U.S. Senate has its advise and consent clause in the Constitution. And now here we are with these two people nominated to be, parts of very significant operations in the U.S. government, and a belief, and I don't know that they should be wrong, that the Republicans in the United States Senate will probably go along with it. What do you think?
I think it's crazy.
Mm.
I also think that this is something that you and I talked about, you know, prior to the election. Like what we're seeing unfold is exactly what we predicted. Prior in the first Trump administration, there was this situation wherein, he built a cabinet around individuals that made sense as cabinet picks. Like these were individuals who had the resumes, had the wherewithal,
Mm-hmm.
were a little bit out of central casting, but also like just had the experience to actually be these individuals.
Right.
What we're seeing right now, already in the early days of Trump's presidency, so to speak, is him picking loyalists and allies. And this is what we said would happen. Like, people talked about a second Trump presidency and they're like, he didn't do it in the first. He didn't go after his enemies. He didn't do all of these things.
Right.
But the reality is like, because he had actual professionals
Mm-hmm.
by his side who were filling up his cabinet, who made sense and acted as bulwarks against his like own worst instincts and his own um political vindictive instincts. And what we're seeing already in the earliest days is him completely filling his cabinet with allies. Like Matt Gaetz was under investigation
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for like sex
for
trafficking, sex
for
trafficking and
sex trafficking.
sleeping with underage girls. Yes.
not for like, and not that like tax evasion's cool or anything, but it wasn't tax evasion. It's like real stuff. Like, and the reality is Trump is like, yeah, you're my guy. Why is he his guy?
because he'll
And
do
we have
whatever
to
he's
think about
asked.
that. Exactly. Particularly when he pulls him out of the House, when like the House Ethics Committee was about to drop a report on this individual that likely was negative, and he resigned from Congress to serve as Attorney General. Are you kidding me? This dude has never practiced law in a real way in his entire life. So
And I think that that's right, and all of that stuff is important and matters. And I think that again, what I'm trying to say is that there are senators, already Lisa Murkowski is upset from Alaska, and you'll be shocked, Abby. Susan Collins is very concerned.
is she
Um,
mad?
I don't think she's mad. I
Is
think she's worried because, all of this stuff, she just doesn't know. She's just so concerned about everything. Um,
Susan
but
Collins will get mad. Lisa Murkowski actually does vote.
right. But so there's this idea of, okay, well,
Sorry, not to
can
be
no,
throwing
no,
barbs.
please, no, throw barbs all you'd like. But the point is not even whether or not he'll be confirmed. It's the idea here that if people speak out when he goes before, I guess it's the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then he potentially goes to a vote, right? This is where now the movement takes over, which is the movement is demanding purity. Trump is demanding purity. And normally, this is a little bit out of sequence for what authoritarian movements often do when they get back in power. Typically, they'll go after the people that betrayed them first, the types of people who worked in the first administration, who worked in the first White House and came out against him. But maybe it's just the nature of the American system. So they've got to stock the government first. So the purity test will come first, and it will be ongoing, right? And this will be, this is my guy. You're gonna take my guy. And if you don't take my guy, I'm going to unleash Elon and the hounds on you, right? And Elon's already saying anybody that votes against Trump's whatever it is agenda, he'll personally fund primary opponents. I don't put it past him. Now, there's a whole other part of Elon being the unwanted house guest in Mar-a-Lago, but he is a power center in his own right now. He was a social power center. He was a financial power center. Now he's a political power center, which is he's all in on Trump. He's all in on this stuff because it accrues to his benefit too, which is he's just a little boy still looking to fill that hole that I guess mom and dad never gave him enough love or whatever the case might be. And Gabbard is the same thing, which is Trump is saying to the United States Senate, I know she's a Russian agent. You know she's a Russian agent. The Russians are admitting she's a Russian agent. Now tell me I can't have her, right? Tell me I can't give her the job. I want to see which of you is going to stand up to me and which of you isn't. It's basically, the word decimation came out of the Roman era, which is 1 out of every 10 men was killed for whatever the offense was. This is setting up to be the Republican decimation. Who is going to stand up and say, yes, sir, I'll do it and march forward? And who's going to say, no, I won't? And the truth is that, Abby, if these guys had just done a little bit of this 4 years ago, we wouldn't be here, right? If they had said, I mean, Mitch McConnell, maybe he claims he didn't, but Mitch McConnell probably could have had 17 votes to convict Donald Trump in January and February of 2021. He chose not to do it. And here we are now. And so, like, we shouldn't be surprised. And to your point, like, oh, there were audible gasps in the room when Matt Gaetz's name was announced. And can you believe Gabbard? And can you believe Pete Hegseth? Like, to your point that you made earlier, like, what did you think was going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think when we're looking at if I were Donald Trump,
Mm-hmm.
I would pick Matt Gaetz.
Right.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't I? The reality is like Trump ran a he ran a campaign on getting people who had previously voted for him to believe that he would continue to do exactly what he did during the first term.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also ran on telling people that he wouldn't do his worst instincts. Like, that's kind of like the weird sweet spot that he got in this election.
Mm-hmm.
You have people trotting it out. You have all these ex officials saying, like, he's a war criminal, he's Hitler, he's all of these things. And yet he's saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. Other people are saying he didn't do it the first time, he's not going to do it now. The
Right.
reality is like, he is elected, and it's been days, not weeks, and he's filling his cabinet with allies. And if you recall, during his first administration, his cabinet picks were a circus of ne'er-do-wells, half of whom didn't get elected
Or
or
confirmed.
confirmed
Right.
at all. And he's telling people in the Senate, like, I don't think that I should have to deal with Senate confirmation.
Right.
Like,
These silly
he's
rules.
already
Right.
saying that these rules are silly. And like, the first round, the first go round on the merry-go-round, remember Scott Pruitt? Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
He was the EPA administrator. Right.
Couldn't get approved because of all of these things. And right now, what we're seeing is Donald Trump isn't just, picking individuals who are under house ethics investigations that probably wouldn't get confirmed. He's truly saying, I don't believe in Senate confirmation. Like, he's saying that in his conversations around the Senate Majority Leader race, which, votes
Right. I
take
want you
place
to go
on
into
Wednesday.
recess so I can appoint all my people as acting. It's usually for like a year, but of course, they'd never leave. Chad Wolf from DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, was another one in the first term. Yeah, and this was all. We did all these tabletop exercises, and this was always how it was going to be, right? And
He
and
repeatedly stretched the imagination around the quote unquote acting role
mhm.
during his first term. And he figured out that you're waiting for Senate confirmation. You can have these individuals. Chad Wolf was like fifth in line.
Yeah,
Chad Wolf was like, so for listeners, Chad Wolf was like the comms guy at
right.
like DHS, who was in the pocket of Stephen Miller, and he got elevated. I actually wrote a story about this for
Mm,
Vanity Fair. You should read it.
okay, we'll
He
put it in the
got
show notes.
elevated. He got elevated because he was a yes man, and Trump and Trump's administration, and not even Trump, but like Stephen Miller
Mhm.
realized that you can do that. You can put these individuals in charge of these massive departments with so far reaching influence and change without Senate confirmation. And now he's saying the quiet part out loud that he doesn't want to need Senate confirmation. But the reality is like, in the second half of Donald Trump's administration, he abused and used acting positions to his advantage,
Right. And so,
particularly at DHS and elsewhere.
well, and so, here's the thing about, let's talk about Gaetz, right? Let's say he isn't able to be confirmed, so they figure out a way to make him acting. There is going to be somebody, Abby, who, let's say, is nominated to be deputy attorney general. Now, the deputy attorney general will probably be the person, at least in my estimation, who would be the person who would go out and say, okay, who are all the people we're actually going to take action against, right? Somebody who's probably pretty serious, who understands the nature of how these things work and will utilize them against American citizen. Gaetz is out there to scare the hell out of people. That's what he did in the House. That's what he did to his fellow House members. Remember, it was Gaetz who rallied the troops against a Kevin McCarthy speakership. It was that 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe. And ultimately brought it back to oust McCarthy was that the fall of 2023, I guess. And so, that's what his job is. His job is to run around and scare the hell out of people. There's going to be somebody who's much smarter and much more in tune with both the ideology and the capacity of the Department of Justice to do these sorts of things. And I think that's the other part, that's worrisome, but I guess we should, on some level, I don't say we should get over it, but we just need to accept what it is that as we sit here, Abby, there's probably tens of millions of Americans, maybe hundreds of millions of Americans who, one, have never heard of Matt Gaetz, and two, don't care. They're like, I don't know who the guy is. I don't know what he's done. Is that really going to affect me? Is this going to affect me? Well, it might. But I think, I think I'm a little bit jaundiced on the idea that the people writ large care about individual cabinet agencies, right? Or care about who runs them. I mean, Pete Hegseth is the Fox and Friends, weekend host. Okay. It won't surprise me if he does get not only nominated, but confirmed. But does anybody know who Lloyd Austin is? Does anyone who goes to work all day, every day, trying to figure out how to make ends meet, like, are they worried about who the Secretary of Defense is? I'd venture to say the answer is no. Unless it was, when there was a scandal about the fact that he had cancer and he didn't tell anybody, right? That's probably the only time anybody's ever heard of Secretary Austin. And so that's I don't want to say cynical. Jaundiced is a better word. That's my jaundiced view is I'm not sure how many individual Americans are really even paying attention to this stuff. I would venture to say that most of them are happy that the whole thing is over.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think that it's very easy to write off an individual like Matt Gaetz as a cartoonish figure.
Yeah.
And he's not. I profiled him for Vanity Fair. I spent, a day with him at CPAC in March 2020. Like I should have gotten hazard pay. Literally it was like after, all of these individuals got COVID,
Right.
March 2020. Matt Gaetz is smart. Matt Gaetz is charismatic. Matt Gaetz can have a conversation. He knows what he's doing. I don't think he's necessarily a true believer. I do believe he's a true believer in what is the best thing for Matt Gaetz.
Right.
And the reality is he is going to move toward that in his career, however it suits him. And we've seen that, he knows how to get a soundbite. He knows how to have a quippy remark during an oversight committee hearing that then gets picked up by Fox News, that then gets picked up elsewhere. And
Right.
he's playing a game and he's a character in a larger play at which, like, Donald Trump is the director. And don't underestimate him. Don't underestimate any of these individuals. Like, they know what they're doing. And look, Matt Gaetz, under House investigation, now is nominated for Attorney General.
Top law enforcement officer in the land. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we're at. Like, this isn't a clown. This isn't an individual who should be written off. This is somebody who's smart and intelligent, and he's playing, as much as you might not agree with his methods or his views or his ideas, he's smart and he's playing cards that have been dealt to him.
I mean, you
And
could, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's it. Like,
I mean, you could make an argument there because there was talk before his nomination that he would go back to Florida and run for governor because Ron DeSantis is termed out. You could make an argument because Florida has a very late primary. I think it's an August primary, Abby, which means that the filing deadline is probably like March of 2028. You could make an argument that Matt Gaetz, either in a confirmed or an acting capacity, spends a year as attorney general, says, thanks for all the giggles, President Trump. I'm going home to run for governor of Florida with 100% of Trump and MAGA backing, right? Crushes anybody in the primary. And the Democratic Party in Florida doesn't have enough people to fill the booth in a diner, and won't put anybody up, against him who has any real shot. And then he'll be governor of Florida. And you could make an argument that he would be governor of Florida alongside U.S. Senator Lara Trump because Marco Rubio has been nominated to be Secretary of State. And when and if he is confirmed, which I assume he absolutely will be, because he, in this upside down world we live in, Abby, he's considered the good choice, for the top diplomatic post in the country, that there will be enormous pressure on DeSantis to appoint Lara Trump to fill the unexpired term. Like, that's the funhouse mirror we're living in.
so Matt Gaetz is, um, he's actually a frustrating individual to interact with.
I can only imagine.
In that, like, he is charismatic and he is likable. And you're like, oh, this is a choice. Like, you're choosing
Sure.
all of these things. Matt Gaetz would absolutely win as governor of Florida. Full stop. Have you seen Ron DeSantis speak?
Right.
Come on, you
Right.
know? And like, if we talk about the primary system, look at Texas. Ted Cruz is one of the most unlikable individuals in the world.
Yeah.
He wins a Republican primary over and over, and he beats out an individual like Colin Allred, Beto O'Rourke, all of these individuals, because that's where the state is. The reality is like where Texas is where Florida now is. Florida is not a battleground. Florida is not purple.
Right.
And the reality is Matt Gaetz is more charismatic than Ron DeSantis, full stop. He's also more liked by Donald Trump, who's very liked in the state. Like, Matt Gaetz can hold a conversation. Ron DeSantis is wearing, I don't know, like elevated cowboy boots, trying to
Right.
like pull a Rubio. And like, if you hear him speak, you're like, this is the guy saying like 6 weeks, nothing
May,
on women's uteruses. I don't
may I
know.
ju-
I'm on a rant. I'm on
no,
a rant at this
let me,
point.
can I just pitch in on the DeSantis piece? So 2 years ago, almost to the day, Rick Wilson and I are at the New York Times meeting with the editorial board, at their request. And they're all about DeSantis. And we're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, DeSantis, DeSantis, DeSantis. And we're like, this is the most overbought stock in political history. And they're like, no, 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 no. He can. I'm like, what makes you think that? I'm like, we have done this a lot. We have seen candidates up close a lot. And it doesn't take very long, at least, especially at the presidential level, Abby, to understand like whether or not someone's got it or not. Do they have what it takes? He never had what it took. Never. And that was one of those things I was like, this guy? Really? No. And then all this money flowed into him. Like, what were these people thinking? Right? Like, what were these people thinking? And then, he didn't run a good race. He did. I mean, if you were going to run against Donald Trump in a presidential primary, what was the whole job? Destroy Donald Trump. Refused to do it. Right? They all refused to do it. I mean, Nikki Haley sort of tried. But DeSantis, you're right, was never a good politician, but for the fact that he won a primary, nobody expected he would win with the help of Donald Trump, right? And then he completely kowtowed to Donald Trump. And now he's going to, and maybe he'll take over, right? I mean, he would probably take a job in a Trump administration because what the heck else is he going to do? Or maybe he wants to run
Of
for Senate in
course.
his own right. And so that's the other part too, is that I
I wouldn't
want,
be surprised if Nikki Haley took a job in a Trump administration.
well, but she was told that she is not welcome. He said that neither she nor Mike Pompeo would be getting a job in his administration. He posted that. He actually posted that.
No, I know, I know. The
But
reality though is
you know
it's
what?
like
But you know what? If there, did you see that story though about Chris Christie? There was a story about Chris Christie. Someone called him and said, "If you go to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring, all sins will be forgiven." And even Christie's like, "I'm good, thanks." Right? So it's just transaction. It's the
the
public,
corrupt former governor of
right?
New Jersey
But it's
is saying no to that.
right.
Like
But it's the public self abasement of that, right? The idea of, come before me like Kevin McCarthy did 4 years ago. Sit there and say, yes, Mr. Trump. Yes, President Trump. Yes, Mr. Trump. Yes, President Trump. And, he'll forgive you. He doesn't care. He wants that self immolation. He thrives on it like every good demagogue does. And, so, I mean, Chris Christie, like now he's got a backbone. Okay. But all he cares about is keeping a CBS contract, right? He doesn't really care. Because even as Tim Miller wrote in his book, the only thing Christie cares about, and a lot of guys like him, is being quote unquote in the game, right? He just doesn't want to be forgotten, which is such a sad statement on him, but really of the political system, which I know is not unusual and not new, but like these people, this is how they want to spend their lives, is like on a green room on a Sunday morning for like 8 minutes on television. Blah. Yeah. I mean, you've had to live it. You've had to live the other side of it. So, all right. Well, we'll see how all this goes. But again,
all I'm saying is Matt Gaetz is playing the game
mm,
and he's more charismatic than people think. I wouldn't be surprised if he's governor of Florida one day.
I would agree. I would agree. All right. Well, so that we'll just have to see how that all works itself out. Because I mean, we've turned America into reality television. I guess it's our own fault. All right. So speaking of reality television, Abby, um, Alex Jones is the founder of InfoWars. And we should remember that Alex Jones got his start on cable access in Austin, Texas, before he built this massive, I don't even know if right wing is the right expression for this, but
I
conspiracy
think
laden
fringe.
fringe, yes, fringe but popular following on YouTube. He had his own station. He was
The fringe is popular on both sides.
right. Yes, yes. But yes, made lots of money. But again, one of the conspiracy theories that he loved to push and ultimately got him in trouble was the idea that the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting was a quote unquote false flag operation in which a young man went and killed a couple of dozen people, including many kids. The parents and families of the victims sued him for this. Won, and InfoWars had to go into bankruptcy and ultimately its assets up for auction. It was reported that The Onion, that bastion of decades long satirical, political, and otherwise social coverage, had bought the assets of InfoWars. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this, Abby, was because one, the Onion, without fear or favor, takes on everybody, right? It'll skin anybody that it finds in its sights. But the Onion gets all of the lists, all of the data, all of this stuff, and it's really interesting to see what they will do with it going forward, as they now have, the ability to email, I don't know how many, let's say it's 1 million people, just for argument's sake, on Alex Jones's email list saying InfoWars brought to you by The Onion. And how many people will even notice? Because what The Onion does satirically and what Alex Jones did conspiratorially, right? Some people might not know the difference.
Yeah. I don't know that InfoWars consumers are going to be happy. um, you know, but also it's like if we're talking Venn diagrams here, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the um it's a little sad. I'm sorry, I'm like laughing at it, but like the Onion will
Mm-hmm.
like satirically make something up, right?
Right.
And they're gonna say like so and so did this, Marco Rubio did this,
Right.
ex-senator did this, blah blah blah. And then what happens is InfoWars and reality just collide.
Right.
And we're going to be in a very interesting space of like satire meets reality because
Or satire meets unreality.
unreality. And like the thing is like, so you listen to people talk about Veep, for instance. Have you
Mm-hmm.
watched Veep?
Of course.
It's great.
It is. That's the most accurate political show there's ever been.
Yeah, it is the most accurate political show there's ever been. It's not The West Wing.
No.
It's Veep. And Veep, literally, Julia Louise Dreyfus comes out and she talks about it and she says, we couldn't keep writing the show because like reality eclipsed.
Right. Kept getting too close. Right.
That's where we're at. And like the Onion meeting InfoWars might be like the perfect encapsulation of this fusion between reality and
Right.
like satire, especially now. So,
Can we just spend a couple of minutes on Veep? So
yeah, let's talk Veep.
let's talk Veep.
I
So
love it. I
it's
love it.
such a brilliant show, and everyone on the show, every member of the cast played their part so brilliantly. And Abby, the idea that you could write a show where every line of every episode for 47 minutes or whatever it was funny is, I mean,
So good.
it is literally to me a work of art. The idea that you could do that, but what when
Everybody should watch Veep. Everybody
everyone
should watch
should,
Veep.
and when friends would be like, oh,
You should also watch The West Wing, but like for like a different
different
reason.
reason, or what was the House of Cards, right? Like, oh, is House of Cards real? No, Veep is real. And here's what I want to say: 90% of the guys in Washington D.C. are Jonah, and the other 10% are the guy the comms guy, the young comms guy, right?
Dan?
Dan, yeah. So it's 90% Jonah, 10% Dan. Maybe you might have a different
I
proportion,
think
but
it's 90%. I think it's 50-50,
so it's all
Jonah
right. So
and Dan.
50% Jonah, 50% Dan. I totally think that's a viable proportion. But like it's one of those reasons why I'm so glad I live 2,000 miles away, right? I grew up with that. I worked in that. And I am wholly unsuited to be either Jonah or Dan. But it was such they wrote it so perfectly as two guys who just literally embody, even in 2024, almost 2025, so many of what Washington D.C. produces. These self-important, guys. And I'm going to speak on the guys here. And you can't make them up, except you can. And you see it, you're like, how did this guy get this job? And I used to call it, and pardon the, I know I'm going to curse here. I'm not bleeping it. I called it the FUMU principle: fuck up, move up, right? And look at Jonah, right? He goes from being the goon who works for the president to running for president. And remember the episode where he learns that the numbers are actually Arabic numerals. And he's like, we're not teaching that Arab math anymore. And people are like, yeah. I mean, it was just so perfect in its time. And you're right. I don't know that they could write it in such a way that they wouldn't be trying to catch up with reality at this point.
It's so good. Like I just did a rewatch. Um, Look, like I moved, so I lived in New York City for 6, 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I moved to DC. And then I was like, oh man, every dude and their mom is wearing khakis. And the first question is who you work for.
Yeah. What do you do?
In New
Right.
York City, what do you do? You know? And there are the Jonahs of the world. They're certainly the Danes of the world. I do believe that they're 50-50,
Hmm.
who are like moving up, but like it's not the West Wing. Like we aren't with like Rob Lowe as like comms director.
Right.
No. We are literally Mike McClintock is comms director.
Right.
Like it's not Rob Lowe writing like these epic stories and
Right.
you know all of the above. It's and the Veep actors, writers have come out and they're like, we couldn't keep
Hmm.
doing it because like
Right.
reality eclipsed parody.
But you know what was brilliant was that I don't, this is several years ago now, but I read somewhere that if they showed if they showed an episode to a Republican, they thought they were that Veep was Democratic, and if they showed it to a Democrat, they thought the Veep was Republican, right? Which I thought was like
That's interesting.
such a brilliant way, because here's the point: at the end, it was all cynical, right? There was no belief system. It was just, how do I climb over that guy? How do I climb over that gal? And the one thing that I've always found, again, why I'm glad I so glad I don't live there anymore, Abby, is the idea that there's such a concentrated group of people who believe that if they missed work for one day, that they are so personally important that the earth would spin off its axis. And I was guilty of that in my younger days. I missed weddings, I missed friends events, I missed all this stuff because there's like, no, I have to be at my desk, I have to be at my desk. When in reality, like, the train keeps on rolling, it doesn't care. Occasionally the train runs you over, occasionally you're driving the train. But the difference is like the train doesn't really care who you are, with the exception of like 5 or 6 people who literally run the world. And as we talk about the beginning now, those people are all either in the pay and employ of the Russian government, or are, in hock to Donald Trump for some reason, which is why, again, how would you satirize a Donald Trump administration? You couldn't do it.
You can't. And there's no way to satirize satire. It's already there.
And
I
and
guess like
go ahead.
m my question to you is like, who do you think are the 4 to 5 individuals in control of the world right now?
Oh, it's a great question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I maybe 2 of them live in the United States, right? Maybe 2 of them, I mean,
You know who I think's at the top of the list?
who?
Laura Trump,
Maybe.
smartest of the Trumps.
Well, that's a relative statement, I guess. They're not classically intelligent, right? That's not how you'd see. Yeah, it's not how you'd
They're
see them.
branding intelligent.
Oh yeah, look, I mean, this is the one thing, and again, I know this is gonna, you know, our listeners expect thoughtful dialogue and they should get it, but I think it's also once in a while important to impose the reality of
They're
the
not getting
situation.
it from me.
That, well, they'll try and get it from me. Is like, Americans want a show. Be anything, but don't be boring. And the truth is, boring politicians have really never been successful, right? You've always had to have something that made you more interesting. If you go back and you look at the outcomes for the most part of presidential campaigns since, pick a date, usually the more charismatic candidate wins. You could make an argument that, Jimmy Carter was more charismatic than Gerald Ford. Reagan was certainly more charismatic after Jimmy Carter in 4 years. Maybe George H.W. Bush wasn't more charismatic by an objective standard than Michael Dukakis, but Michael Dukakis had zero charisma. And then you go down the line, and Trump is more charismatic than than
Let's talk
and
about Marco Rubio.
the jellyfish himself,
Yeah, because
little
you
Marco.
ran presidential campaigns in 2016, and now here we are with this dude bending over backwards to Donald Trump to be Secretary of State. And also, he was one of the biggest Russia hawks, not only in the Senate, but in Congress. And he said the other day that the war was a stalemate
Sure.
and we needed a change. So
again, I think it goes back to the idea of what you said. I think so many of these people um, just exist on a level of gradations, right? And all of it, I think, ultimately, Abby, comes down to ambition. Um, Marco Rubio knows he's never going to be president of the United States. As I understood it from people in Florida, he didn't really like being a senator anymore, right? That he just like he was sort of over it. But to be Secretary of State, right? You're at the State Department, get your own airplane, right? You get your own
They
security service,
live the seventh floor.
right? Everywhere you go, right? It's a big deal. And this is the best it's ever going to get for him. And ironically enough, there are enough people in official Washington who, like, as I said at the top, oh, he's a good choice. He's a good choice. He's the perfect choice if your name is G, or if your name is Vladimir, or if your name is Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or anybody else who'd like to take the U.S. to task, because no one's going to take him seriously. No one's like, oh, yeah, there's a serious guy. There's a guy who
Why
really
do you
knows his
say
stuff.
that?
Because because by definition, if you said everything you said about Donald Trump in 2016, and he, again, ridiculed you in public, little Marco, all the other emasculating things that Trump said and did to him, and now you are willing to go represent that man, I think it says everything you need to know about him. And I think, look, Cruz is the same way. Jeb Bush is the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
he loved. I mean, the difference between the Bushes, between George and Jeb, is that on that debate stage in 2015, if Donald Trump had made fun of Laura Bush, George W. Bush would have gone over and punched him in the face. Right? Like,
He
that's
would
the
have.
difference. That's the difference. And I'm not making any value judgments
Maybe
on
that's why Michelle Obama's friends with him.
right. But, if Trump said to Jeb Bush, I want to make you ambassador to the Bahamas, Jeb would take in a heartbeat. Right. And so it's really just a matter of these guys are in it for themselves. And maybe that's what politics has always been, despite my whatever's left of my idealism. But in a situation like this, you got to get what's the getting's good. And if all you have to do, Abby, is, as we talked about a few minutes ago, is kiss the ring, what do you care? Right? Like,
Well,
Mitt Romney said this in his biography, great biography written by McKay Coppins at The Atlantic, is once you've completed the process of rationalization, you sleep well at night because you've made your peace with whatever the thing was you were wrestling with internally. And Marco Rubio, he made his peace with that. And now his reward, and it is a reward, is going to be being Secretary of State of the United, being Secretary of State. He's going to get his portrait, at Foggy Bottom alongside, people like George Marshall and, so many other really respected diplomats over the years. And would anybody say, oh, yeah, he's the right guy for that? I just don't think so.
so question for you, Reed. Who was the last Republican of standing? Is it Mitt Romney? Is it Lisa Murkowski? Who is it?
Mm. Yeah, probably Murkowski would be my guess. I mean,
Well,
John Thune, go ahead.
Murkowski voted against Kavanaugh,
Yeah.
and she said we should hold the Supreme Court to a standard. And she's like, I want to hold them to that standard. She's like, we've lost the legislative, we lost the executive, and she voted against them. Susan Collins blows hot air,
Yes.
doesn't do it. But you think it's Murkowski? Is it
I
Romney?
No, Romney's gone. Romney's gone, so it doesn't matter anymore. And the truth is that Mitt could, the one thing that Romney could never shave off was his being a business guy, right? Being a consultant, where he always wanted to leave himself room to make another decision if he had to go back on something. And I think that's fine when you're trying to figure out how to shut down a business, right? Because it's not your job and it's your money you're going to make. It's somebody else's money you're going to spend. But if you're going to be a leader, you have to put some stakes in the ground. And he did that in 2016. Um, and he did it when he voted to impeach Trump, or to convict Trump, excuse me. But, the idea here that, like, you're not going to say Kamala Harris should be president, again, it's one of those things where I think that both the Bush and the Romney families, they still believe that somehow their family name has some purchase within the Republican Party, and it doesn't. Right? It doesn't. I live in Utah, right? Mitt Romney's going to be my senator for the next 6 weeks. No one named Romney is probably getting elected to office in the state of Utah as a Republican. Just not going to happen. Maybe someplace else. Maybe if you go back to Michigan, but not here.
Do you know what's really cool about Lisa Murkowski? Is that she won as a write-in candidate.
Right. Right.
Tell people about that, Reed.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's from Alaska, right? And her family's, I think her family goes back to literally like when the Alaska Territory became a state.
She lost like the Republican primary,
right?
And then she literally won her Senate seat as a write-in candidate.
Right. And she's probably the only person that could do that in the only place you probably could do that, which is, again, a state like Alaska. Maybe you could do it in a place like Wyoming, someplace where there's just not very.
You were so close to saying Minnesota.
No, I was not. No, I was not. I mean, where's Jesse though? Where's Jesse when we need him? I know.
Okay, my mom voted for Jesse Ventura, and it was like a real sticking point in my parents' marriage for a long time.
Well, he I think he lives in Cabo now, or Baja someplace, and he's an interesting cat. But look, he was an independent, right? Only ran for one term. But it's interesting. This is where all things come together. How did he make his
body Ventura?
Jesse the Body Ventura. Not only was he a wrestler, not only was he an actor, he was a Navy SEAL, but he had a radio show, right? He had a radio show where he spoke to Minnesotans, right? All day, 5 days a week. Again, they felt like they knew him. Now, maybe they didn't like him after 4 years. Maybe he just thought being governor was boring. For a guy like him, probably wouldn't surprise me. But again, I think it comes back to this idea of communication, right? Of, all right, how does the Onion utilize the tools of InfoWars, right? How do we communicate with voters? And I know this gets annoying, but like where they are, which is literally physically where they are, Abby, right? Not where we think they should be, not with some high-minded blah, 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 not on cable news, because that's not where they are. But you got to go out and you got to literally reach out and get them. And I think that, what's his name? Marshall McLuhan, is that his name? McLuhan? The medium is the message. Now, I think it matters what you're saying, but for the most part, you got to show up somewhere. You got to be someplace people are willing to talk and be, frankly, more willing to listen. And Jesse did that in Minnesota, right? He parlayed that into being an independent governor. Who thought that would ever be possible? So anyway, wow, we have been all over the map.
Truly, literally. I guess, like, are you saying that Jesse Ventura was the precursor to the Joe Rogans and Alex Jones of the world?
No, because we had no, I mean, you could make an argument that FDR was, fireside chats was the first person to understand that medium. Father Coughlin, utilized the radio in a very damaging anti-Semitic way, for many years. Rush Limbaugh understood it, right? But here's the one
got it.
Huh?
Limbaugh got it. Yeah.
Because here's the other part. It's not just about talking to people. It has to be entertaining. Right? Now, entertaining doesn't necessarily mean conspiracy laden like Joe Rogan or Alex Jones, but it does mean that you have to bring people back. Right? It does mean that people want to say, okay, I mean, think about there's a movie about Howard Stern, and I mentioned this on the last episode too. It's called Private Parts, based on his book, which was actually
so good.
Very funny.
Such a good movie.
And he's at NBC. He's at the NBC flagship station in New York, and the executives hate him, but his ratings are through the roof. And they say, what do you mean? What are people saying? Well, the people that love him, they say they hold on because they want to see what he's going to say next. Well, what about the people that hate him? They want to see what he's going to say next, right? And he's been doing it for darn near 50 years. And so, I mean, so Howard was there too. Howard changed the culture, right? On the radio. Maybe Americans have always been audiophiles. Um, Now video is a big deal, I guess, but you can't take video with you, really, right? That's the other part about audio. You take it with you.
Well,
Um,
and now people are watching podcasts, which is like,
and I want everybody who's available to watch this podcast with Abby and me should watch
please
it.
do.
Please do. But again, you can't watch us while you're walking your dog. I mean, I guess you could. Um, you're not probably going to watch us while you're grocery shopping or while you're driving. Please don't watch us while you're driving. Listen to us while you're driving. But that's an interesting thing. It all comes back to, who's going to talk, who's going to listen, and what action are people going to take. I mean, here we are, right? Donald Trump, right, was a video medium, right? He's like the guy, he's like Jim Carrey and the cable guy. For him, if it occurs on television, it's real. And so, this idea, maybe we've been overcomplicating this stuff all this time, Abby, which is like, get on the radio, get on television, get on the radio, get on television or
I think we have.
podcasts. All right. Before I let you go, and I appreciate you coming along today, where can our folks find you on the interwebs?
On Instagram, I'm at Abby Tracy, and on Twitter, I'm at Abigail Tracy.
How long do you think you'll stay on Twitter? I have lost like 10,000 followers in like the last week. Not that I
Dude,
care.
like, I don't know. It used to be a news medium for me.
Right.
It no longer feels that way. I'll stay on it to stay on it, but I don't use it.
Right. Well, as always, gang, you can find me still on Twitter too, as I am guilty as well, at Reed Galen, also on TikTok, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA. Substack, the home front, and says us, SEZ.us. Get on over there, gang. Join me, Joe Trippi, and so many others building out the social media platform for sane people. Abby, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.